Starting off with an interesting question from Bell, and it's, does starting with immersion have noticeable benefits? A lot of people discover immersion learning or even Refold after having spent a lot of time trying to learn a language using conventional methods, school classes, Duolingo, etc., with limited results. In your experiences with coaching, do clients who have spent, say, a year or so on ineffective study show noticeable differences compared to those for whom immersion learning is their first attempt at language acquisition?
Yeah, so I guess there's two different questions here. One of them is, does a year of immersion learning have different benefits than a year of traditional study? Versus if you have 2 years of immersion learning versus 1 year traditional study and 1 year immersion learning.
Yeah.
And I would say in the first one, there are definite benefits. One of the things that we see very often is that those who started with immersion learning early on, they have like a much better accent. They can hear the language better. There was someone I was talking to recently who's in Japan, and he goes to say something, and everyone thinks like, oh, you actually speak Japanese because like your accent is good. You sound like Japanese. You're imitating the way the language actually sounds, and they start to just like machine gun fire Japanese at him. He's like, whoa, 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 whoa.
I'm actually terrible. Hang on.
I'm not good yet. I just like, I have the ear for it because I've spent, 1,000 hours listening to it. So there is definitely benefit to starting immersion earlier. In terms of, does 1 year of immersion learning and 1 year of traditional study, and like what the difference between that versus 2 years of immersion learning, that one I think is less defined, other than I think the 2 years of immersion learning, someone would be farther into understanding. Traditional study tends to focus on output and grammar study, and so there's less focus on trying to understand native. So I think that person's comprehension would be worse. But in terms of like output ability, not 100% sure about that. And in terms of like what happens over the long term, I think everyone kind of just converges. So I would say, yes, there are benefits, but I do not think that you are cursed if you have started with traditional study.
Yeah, they're not strictly, it's not 100% obvious benefits all down the line for about every single thing possible in the entire process, but generally there's like benefits that might come out in the wash as well.
Yeah. One other thing that I've noticed in my own studies, because I started with traditional learning and with like language hacking and skill building, is that I became very reliant on certain key phrases and sentence structures. And those are kind of like still embedded with me. I still rely on those. So that would be one situation where we would need to do a lot more testing to verify that this is true. But the hypothesis there is that because I relied on those so much earlier, that they are hard to change now because I've practiced with them so much.
Yeah, actually, anecdotally, I also know somebody who spent some time down in Honduras doing volunteer work, and he was like, "Yeah, I got I could do stuff in it, but I would, if I was basically all the time, I would just do I'm going to and then infinitive, right? I'm going infinitive. Like that was the only real pattern that he like used, and it was 80% of his Spanish because that's kind of what he just focused on. And so losing a bit of that flexibility, I think, is something that traditional study might push you into.
Yeah, and in Spanish, there's, and I assume in other languages as well, there are certain sentence structures and certain constructions that allow you to communicate almost immediately. Like within a month, you can basically have conversations by just sort of cheating the system and ignoring a bunch of the conjugation study. And so if, I started my Spanish journey like that, and I became very reliant on those sort of like power constructions that, for those who play guitar, like power chords are another example of this. It's like, you don't actually have to, like know the whole chord. You only need like the first 3 notes on top. You can kind of like get away with it.
Just do open tuning and bar chords.
There you go. Exactly. Open tuning bar chords.
That's the trick.